Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to Working Together Live, a show about equity in the workplace with the leaders changing the face of business. Last week was the Trans Week of Visibility and Action, a week dedicated to celebrating transgender people and raising awareness about the discrimination they face around the world. How can employers fully realize the importance of transgender talent at work? Joining me now is Raquel Willis. She is an award-winning writer, activist, and media strategist dedicated to Black transgender liberation. She's the former executive editor of Out Magazine and a national organizer at the Transgender Law Center. She got her BA in Communications and Journalism from the University of Georgia. Raquel, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to see you. I know last week was a very busy week for you, so I know a lot of people in the stream are very grateful for your time, and we're excited to speak with you. We are speaking on the heels of Transgender Week of Visibility and Action, an event that you were a key organizer of. Talk to us about last week. What were some of the key results? What made you excited about the movement?
Yeah, well, just to back up a little bit, so I partnered with ACLU attorney Chase Strangio, who's really been on the front lines of a lot of the anti-trans legislation moving over the last few years. Last year was a banner year of all of these different bills moving to restrict the rights of trans youth, of trans athletes trying to play the sports that they love, and around healthcare and so much more. So we really wanted to elevate what was happening and really push folks to get more involved. This year was the second iteration of it. We focused on seven different states that have this legislation moving. And it's really about educating folks, elevating grassroots organizations, and just keeping people involved in the fight. We've got to take control of our lives.
I want to hear more about how that education is going, because unfortunately, there are hundreds of bills out there pending in state legislatures across the United States that would ban healthcare for trans minors, ban trans women and girls from sports, ban trans people from restrooms, and schools from just educating about the history of trans people. What are some of the steps? How are you raising awareness? And what are you finding in terms of what the base level knowledge is of the average American of some of these bills that are threatening to be pushed forward?
Yes, well, I think a lot of the fire that we're dealing with right now is really just ignorance around the trans experience. A lot of times we have these conservative politicians who are trying to move this legislation, who really, a lot of them don't even know trans people personally, but have kind of used us as political fodder for their political ambitions or their own agenda. A lot of times they have created an issue out of nowhere when it comes to the trans community. Every major medical association is on the side of trans folks accessing the healthcare that we deserve, including trans youth, and also allowing us to participate in the sports that we deserve to be a part of, along with all of our other passions. So the education is ongoing. I think it's about continuing to elevate the voices of trans people. It's about continuing to get resources into people's hands. We know that a lot of these book bans and curriculum bans are really stifling our experiences. But we know if we continue to write, continue to tell our stories, continue to hop on lives and in conversations like this one, then we'll come out on the other side better than before.
Well, I certainly believe that as well. And speaking of elevating the voices of trans people, you recently launched an incredible series on the transgender community. Talk to us a little bit about that project, how it came about, and also how people in the stream can see it.
Yeah, well, this project, the Trans Youth Town Hall, really came out of some musings I had last year, really around how we can get trans youth to speak out about their experiences from the source. So often it is adults talking for the youth, right? It's people who are not trans talking for trans people. And I really wanted to be a part of creating a forum. So I partnered with the Logo and Viacom, and they came through with all the support on production and casting and everything. And I really was able to executive produce and host this show where we talk to young trans people from ages 11 to 22, from everything like healthcare and their experiences in school to playing sports that they love and just finding joy in other parts of their lives. So often the story is around tragedy and struggle, and people forget, trans people live whole, full lives. We have families, communities who love us and care about us.
I think that's so important because if you think about it, it really is easier to focus on the problems, and rightfully so. There are many that need to be fixed. But what I loved about this series is that you focused on this topic of trans joy. Talk to us a little bit about trans joy. Why did you decide to highlight that? And why is it important to show the full experiences of trans youth in particular?
Yeah, well, if you let the folks who are against us tell our story for us, then you will only hear the difficulties, the struggles. And a lot of times those difficulties and struggles come from the discrimination that we face. I mean, there continues to be high rates of suicidality, of estrangement, and really pushing out of trans youth from their homes. And we are in a unique position now to create a world where that no longer happens, where trans youth and non-binary youth are identifying openly and with more bravery than we ever could imagine in previous generations. And we've got to create a world that is ready for them, that is ready to allow them to access everything that they deserve, from housing to healthcare to education to employment and so much more. So trans joy for me is really learning about my history. Trans people are not new. I know that a lot of people think that, but we have always been here, honey. And, I love my family that has been able to evolve with me in understanding who I am. And I love my community because we have always had each other's backs and showed up for ourselves when institutions weren't necessarily ready to.
That's incredible. Let's hear a little bit more about your story, Raquel, and what trans joy means to you in particular. When you think about your own life, when you think about your experience as a transgender woman, what comes to mind? What do you want the people on the stream to know?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. So I am a Southern girl, grew up in a very traditional Black family, of course, and grew up in a very Catholic household. So I had all of these layers of expectations. And look, I will tell you truthfully and honestly, I know I'm not what, my family imagined I would become. But, I think the beauty in that is that I had a family that was willing to learn, a family that was willing to understand that I had something different to offer than maybe they expected me to. And I was lucky. I know a lot of folks in my community have not had the same privileges I had in coming, from middle class family. My parents were both educators. And my mom, has a doctorate in education. Like, who does that? So, I came from a background where education was key. And I knew, regardless of what happened in terms of understanding my identity, that I had to figure out how to be self-sufficient and have employment and take care of myself. So I was lucky. I studied journalism at the University of Georgia. I knew I loved storytelling, but I also studied gender studies and knew that I wanted to do work that would elevate the experiences of people on the margins. So not even just trans people, for all those people who feel like they don't belong or that society doesn't understand them, for all the folks of color, the Black folks, the women on the margins, this work that I'm a part of in the service of trans liberation is about everyone, not just one community.
I think that's so inspiring as a storyteller myself to hear about how you dedicated your career to focusing on marginalized groups. What keeps you going? These are not easy stories to tell a lot of the time, and sometimes they're met with resistance, no matter the audience that you might be reaching. What keeps you up in the morning? What keeps you going in this fight?
Well, I think it is the stories. I see stories as organizing tools. I think that we have to be active listeners so we know where there are opportunities for solutions. And that's what my organizing background has taught me. after I started my journalism career, I actually was in the closet. So I was not out in my first reporting job at a small newspaper in Georgia as trans or as queer or anything. And that was difficult because I felt like I couldn't be my most authentic self in my work, in the storytelling that I wanted to do. But I found community in Atlanta once I moved to a bigger city. I found other Black trans people who were trying to figure out these solutions too. And, I think we live in a time where so many people know that social justice is important and they're trying to find ways to join whatever fight they deem is important. And I think it's about taking stock of our personal experiences, but also just making a commitment to continue to evolve, to continue to incorporate the new insights that we have as we meet new people along this journey of life.
Well, Raquel, you're already having an impact here on our show. I see a comment here from Camila who says, I'm the proud mom of a 24-year-old transgender son. I think he is the bravest, most courageous person I know. He started the change at 16. I'm so happy he gets to be who he was meant to be. So Camila, thanks for joining us. And Raquel, thank you. Thank you for facilitating this dialogue on LinkedIn. You mentioned the social justice movement, and you were a national organizer at one point at the Transgender Law Center. I'm curious what the big issues were 5 years ago when you started that job and how they've transformed in the last half decade.
Yeah, well, just before 5 years ago, we know that one of the biggest kind of conversations around the LGBTQ community was around marriage equality. And once Obergefell, the court case, kind of changed the landscape for folks in 2015, then really trans folks became a new target. But I think what people forget is that trans folks have been organizing for decades and centuries. I mean, some of our earliest records of trans people or people who would be considered trans today are from the 1800s and beyond. And I mean, some of these folks are Black trans people, right? So it shows that we've always been here. There's always been kind of this sentiment that trans people are not who we say we are. There's always been this strain of criminalization. And I think it's important for us to put that history in context. A lot of folks know about the Stonewall riots, that seminal moment in 1969 that shifted things for the LGBTQ community. But people forget, that it was trans and gender nonconforming folks who were at the front of that cavalry, so to speak, who were really pushing against all of these expectations that society puts on all of us. So the big issues for me continue to be around how we end violence. Last year was the deadliest year on record, and usually it's Black and brown trans women who are being murdered. It's fighting against all of these attacks on trans youth, because trans youth deserves to live whole, full, and healthy lives like any other youth. And, I saw a comment that was like, young people are too young to know these things, but, we never put these same kind of prescriptions on young people who are straight or young people who are cisgender. We kind of take it as a given that everyone has a certain experience. And we're just asking you to understand that our experiences are more expansive, are more nuanced than maybe the considerations you had a second ago.
I think that is such a critical point. And Raquel, you've mentioned a couple times this point, which I think is really critical, which is trans people are not new. That these issues are not new. There's a rich history to this movement. Who's suppressing this history? Thankfully, it's getting more awareness now more than ever, but who's suppressing this history? Why don't people know about it? And where can people start to go if they want to learn more?
Well, I think the history is suppressed on different levels. So there's definitely a systemic suppression. I mean, we see the Don't Say Gay bill, for instance, in Florida, and some of these different bills that are kind of restricting whether anyone can talk about anything other than the straight or cisgender experience in education and in the classroom. And so that is a suppression. But even before these bills popped up, it's not like writ large the US educational system was talking about LGBTQ issues. I first learned about LGBTQ history from Wikipedia in high school. We were not having these discussions in school, and I think that that is a detriment. We should be having more community-based curriculums that speak to diversity, and unfortunately we have a mostly right-wing conservative fight against talking about diversity and inclusion. And it's really about empathy. We should be building empathy within young people to understand that there are people who don't look, live, and love like you, and they deserve to have everything that you have as well. So I think that that's a part of it. But I think the other suppression really just comes with folks' lack of access to understanding the complexity of gender or the complexity of identity. There are plenty of people out there. I know there are plenty of folks in this comment section who are like, young people shouldn't know anything about LGBTQ folks because they will be, influenced to be a part of the community. And that's nonsensical, because if that was the case, we would have much less openly LGBTQ plus folks, because for instance, I grew up in a family that was all straight and cisgender people, and look how amazing and brilliant I turned out to be.
So amazing and so brilliant. That education and that awareness that you speak of, it is being directly threatened by the Don't Say Gay bills that we're seeing pick up in the South right now. Someone on the outside of these issues, and I look at my community, and we were just shocked when this story started to get headlines, when we saw these bills start to be passed. As someone on the front lines, were you shocked? And what does that shock say about how much awareness we have to move forward in terms of getting more awareness to these issues before they even pass?
I wasn't shocked, just because, again, I think because I'm in the thick of it as a trans person, and I had to look at the history to even understand my place in the world. I've seen the direct line from something like the Don't Say Gay bills to the anti-trans youth and anti-trans athlete bills to even the bathroom bills that were happening several years ago, to other laws. There used to literally be anti-cross-dressing laws. One of the reasons the Stonewall riots happened in 1969 was because people were being arrested for not wearing gender appropriate apparel. So there's been a long arc of trying to criminalize people who transgress gender norms throughout US history. But, if we have a public who doesn't know that history, then yeah, it's easy to paint well-meaning people, innocent people, as the boogeyman, so to speak. So I think that that's a part of it, but I wasn't shocked. I know that there's a lot of healing that our society needs to do around gender. The thing for me as a Black trans woman is I see it every day on my Twitter timeline, on Instagram, cisgender men complaining about the expectations on them, and cisgender women complaining about the expectations on them. And this is all a gender struggle. So we've got to get a deeper grasp on why certain expectations around manhood or womanhood and beyond don't fit almost all of us, not just the trans and non-binary people.
Such a critical point. And Raquel, you mentioned the people in the stream who may be against the message that you are trying to spread right now, but you do have many supporters. I want to bring them a few of their stories into our discussion. Troy Noah says, I was 4 when I knew I was transgender. The damage caused by hiding it from the world for 36 years is irreversible. It's toxic to underestimate, disregard your child's feelings. Troy, thanks for sharing your story. And then we have a comment here from Christine who says, being a parent of a transgender daughter, I agree. We need to make the world a more accepting, safe place. She asks, do you think trans joy comes with embracing your identity?
Absolutely. I do. I think that is the source of it. And that is just the start. I think people often still have this idea that, the coming out story is the story. That's not the story, people. That's just the beginning. That's opening you up to live a fuller life so that you don't maybe have to carry shame or secrecy around an essential part of who you are. So I definitely think that that is one of the core sources of trans joy.
Such a great point. Well, Raquel, we are speaking on LinkedIn, which is the website for the professional world. So I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the workplace and how these issues intersect. What are the main prejudices that transgender employees continue to face?
Yeah, well, I think that we still have very binary working environments. We still have these assumptions that everyone kind of fits in a woman box or a man box, and we know that there's so much more to people's experiences. There are often a lot of assumptions around what it means for someone to transition. So, if you're transitioning while you're working somewhere, it can be difficult if you don't have colleagues who are understanding or even affirming of trans experiences. So I think that's key. It's also key for companies and workplaces to profess their values openly, have a commitment to LGBTQ justice and making sure that they show up fully for LGBTQ plus folks. I mean, it goes on and on, making sure that there are health insurance plans that cover trans inclusive healthcare is key. I've definitely worked in my fair share of places where that wasn't the case. And also just making sure, that you're not putting the burden of breaking down some of these systemic issues for trans people on your trans employees if they don't want to do that. Not every trans person is out here trying to be an advocate or an activist. Many of them just want to do other work within their skill set. And so I think it's about finding a balance of elevating the voices internally and also bringing in the right voices from externally to bolster your efforts.
You're so right. This is an issue that we all have to come at together, not just the marginalized groups. I see many managers joining us in the stream right now. Advice for those who want to better support their transgender talent. Perhaps they have someone on their team who is transitioning. How can they, regardless of the policy perspectives in their workplace, be more supportive as a colleague, as a manager, as a boss?
Well, I think the main key is listening. Every trans person is different. I can't give you a blanket approach necessarily if you have someone coming out as trans, but really talking to them. There may be reasons that they don't want to have a larger disclosure to a team. And that's at their discretion. They may actually want your help. I've heard stories of folks having been asked by their manager if it would be okay for them to be the one to kind of hold sending out the correspondence so that everyone is on board. Because sometimes it's difficult to advocate for ourselves. So I think that is key. And, I think folks always want some of the simple things. Some of the simple things are holding pronouns with high regard and with a seriousness, right? So making sure you jump on the Zoom call and you've got your pronouns there, making sure that you're showing up for the trans community, not just on the commemorative days, not just on Trans Day of Visibility or during Pride Month, but all throughout the year. I think it's about consistent displays of a commitment to trans justice and trans liberation.
Well, Raquel, you have been such a breath of fresh air. This is such a welcome conversation on LinkedIn, such a conversation that we need to be having more often, to your point. Before I let you go, I know that you're working on a book. Tell us a little bit about the book and what we can expect from you moving forward.
Yeah, well, the book actually might be a big kind of experience for a lot of folks on LinkedIn. I really tell my story from about 2013 to 2020. So really at the backbone of the book is showing my journey as a journalist and then also as an activist, and really kind of how I tried to balance the two. Coming from a journalism background, you're told be objective, don't be biased. But as I was kind of seeing the world around me shift, the movement for Black Lives was happening, all of these discussions around police brutality, and then of course, an increase in visibility for the trans community, I knew that I couldn't just be behind the scenes. I needed to be a part of the action. So a lot of the book is really that tussle between covering what was happening and experiencing what was happening at the same time.
I will certainly be picking that one up, and I'm sure a lot of people in the stream will as well. Raquel, thank you so much again for your time, and thank you for joining us on Working Together Live.
Of course, thank you.
That was Raquel Willis. She is a writer, a cultural organizer, as well as an activist. I want to thank her for coming on the show and sharing such critical insights. I see so many of you in the stream are thankful for her time as well. All right, Working Together is not just a live show. It is also a newsletter that hits your inbox every Wednesday morning. For more on equity in the workplace and the leaders changing the face of business, subscribe by hitting the comments that we're sharing in the stream right now. All right, on Monday, my colleague Nina Melendez will be with you, and General Petraeus, she's going to give us a breakdown on the war in Ukraine. That's going to be 3 Eastern on the LinkedIn news page. You're not going to want to miss it. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.